Welcome to IB Matters. In this series, we're building an audio catalog of IB Diploma program courses and CP core experiences designed for students, parents, counselors, teachers, and colleges around the world. Each episode gives voice to the syllabus, the real learning, and the student experience behind every course. I'll have the subject brief linked in the podcast notes if you'd like to use it as a reference while you listen. In this episode, we're describing the DP History course, and our teacher guide is Jim Jones. Hi, Jim, and welcome to this series that we're doing on various courses. We're going to talk to you about the DP History course. Why don't you talk or tell us a little bit about your current role and what other DP courses you might be teaching?
Sure. First of all, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to do this. I'm a big fan of the DP History course. Currently, I teach DP Economics, DP History in TOK, but I'm also teaching MYP, Individuals and Society courses as well.
Let's just jump right into the highlights of the syllabus.
For our particular history course, it's really set up so that the students are able to not just learn the story of what happened and learn all the trivia throughout history, which, is not unimportant. And frankly, as somebody who values history, is rather fun in my own mind. But it's really designed more that we have these kind of practical, transferable skills. We help kids think critically. And so if we think, specifically about what the goals of the course are, we're trying to get kids to become inquirers, to learn how to investigate, how to explore and evaluate different historical arguments, and how to, examine these various topics in a pretty deep way. So it's not really set up to be a broad view of, hey, we need to learn every single thing about every single topic because this is world history. It's not that kind of a setup. It is still I would argue, a very rigorous course, but the rigor is more in its depth than it is its breadth of knowledge.
Right.
Now, that being said, the entire syllabus is quite broad. But those are options; those are choices that the schools and the teachers have to make when they're presenting it. The course itself is kind of set up to be taught into these four different contexts, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We have a focus study where we are kind of specifically assigned a couple of different case studies to investigate. And so these are chosen again by the school. For the focus study, we have the opportunity to explore climate and innovation, the challenges and effects those things have on the Norse and the Aztec. We can look at the issue of independence and identity with the Haitian Revolution and Kenyan independence movements. We can look at political and economic transitions with the Meiji Restoration, Russian Federation, conflict and displacement with post-war Europe and the Indochina refugee crisis, and protest and change, which looks at feminism in the U.S. and revolution in Tunisia. And I should also point out, in the focus study, I think one of the reasons that these are so specifically assigned is because it really, this first context, as they call it, this first focus study is really about source analysis. And so having these specific things gives us the opportunity to kind of
that's great.
Be able to evaluate specific sources and such along the way.
All right. How about the thematic study?
Yeah, so the thematic study is going to unsurprisingly focus on these themes, these I don't want to say the concepts, because we also have our key concepts as well, but I mean, they're just kind of these bigger ideas. And this it really gives a lot of freedom and agency to the various schools, the various teachers, to kind of bring in some of their own topics that they want to look at. So if we look at the key themes here, like the idea is that we have to select one of these. So we, much like with the focus study, we have the option to choose. And so we get to look at themes like conflict, innovation and transformation, authoritarian rule, or popular movements. And so we choose one of those four topics. And from that, we have to use at least two examples, two case studies to explore. And the key thing is that we choose two case studies to explore. That's where our freedom comes in. We have the opportunity to really study what is most appropriate for our school's context, what's most interesting to us as teachers and our students even. I mean, there's room for our students to explore some of their own topics. I think that's the direction we are taking them in my schools. We're going to give them several examples, and then, because over the course of this, 2-year course of study, the students are learning how to research, how to investigate. We're going to set them up so that they can kind of investigate some of their own examples here as well. And, within each of these themes, we have like some specific questions. So, just as an example, if we look at authoritarian rule, there's going to be 4 inquiry questions that we need to apply these to. So, we're going to look at why did authoritarian rule emerge? And so, using at least 2 examples from different regions, we're going to look at, okay, well, in this case, in the case of Mussolini, the conditions were like this, and that's similar to how things were in, Cuba with Castro or something like that, right? We can explore things in that way, and again, we're free to bring in whatever case studies that we feel are most appropriate for that.
What do you do differently in HL for the history course?
So for the HL students, they have an additional paper, the paper 3, and that's going to focus on a regional study. And so this is something that, it's again selected by the school. It's chosen. We have a choice of different regions here. We can look at either Africa and the Middle East. We can look at the Americas. We can look at Asia and Oceania, and we can look at Europe. And so we decide ahead of time which one of those units or regions we're going to study. And then from there, we have within that region, we have, a total of 12 topics, and we choose 2 of those topics to really focus on. And across the regions, the time period ranges from 750 CE right up to 2020. And so really the history can get fairly recent here too.
Yeah.
But over that span, it's not expected that that we have covered every single one of those 12 topics, but within that we choose 2 of them.
Okay, sounds good. So now the historical investigation is the internal assessment that goes with this. Again, listeners who are aware of IB's general format knows that each DP course has some form of internal assessment. Why don't you talk about that in the history course?
So the historical investigation is our internal assessment, and it is, in some sense, it's a research paper. In that regard, it's not particularly unique. Students are going to pick a topic. They're going to form a question. They're going to go out and investigate that topic. They're going to find some resources. Hopefully, they're diving into the library, checking out databases online, that kind of thing. However, the format is maybe a little bit different. This is not just like a mini extended essay for history or something like that. It really is going to focus on things more conceptually. Students do have a lot of freedom in terms of their topic. There's no required topic here. So, if a student doesn't want to study Europe in the First World War and look at conflict, and they'd rather do something on civil rights movement or something like that, but it's not in our planned curriculum, this is their opportunity to explore that. So this gives them some freedom and some agency. Here, the content isn't so much what's being assessed as the thinking, the understanding, the investigation, the research and analysis, that sort of a thing. What happens here is it's essentially broken up into multiple parts. They are going to have to find at least, well, I should say at least, they're going to have to find 7 sources that and kind of explain how these sources demonstrate different perspectives of whatever the topic is that they're looking at. They need to be able to explain how these different perspectives are going to help them answer their inquiry question. And then they're going to synthesize those different perspectives and kind of evaluate, weigh the strengths and weaknesses of the various sources and their arguments to come up with some, nice holistic answer that demonstrates critical thought and historical inquiry and hopefully helps them find an answer to their inquiry question. So they need, I may have mentioned this, they need to do that in 2,200 words.
All right, so let's move on to the actual examinations. Why don't you describe those for students that are taking this course?
Yeah, the different history papers. So again, if we're SL students, they're going to be doing paper 1 and a paper 2, as well as a historical investigation. And if they're HL, they're going to be doing a paper 1, a paper 2, and a paper 3.
Okay.
And they are all kind of aligned with the different contexts that we described earlier. So if you think about the focus study, where we're looking at analyzing different sources on these, assigned case studies. Norse and Aztec for the climate one, for instance. They're going to be given a set of sources. They're going to have 3 questions. The questions will always be the same, regardless of the topic, regardless of the year. They're going to be the same questions. They're going to have to explain the content of the sources. They're going to have to analyze how the context of the sources kind of influence how it helps them answer an inquiry question that they've been given.
Mhm.
And then they examine how the different perspectives can help them answer that inquiry question. It's kind of interesting because the focus is not actually answering the inquiry question, but rather on how the sources themselves will
Yeah.
help them answer that inquiry question.
Like you said
Um,
earlier, understanding sources. In other words, evaluating sources is essentially what
yes.
they're asked to do. Okay.
Yeah, that's a real big takeaway, I think, from the
Yeah.
from the history course. Yeah. And then in paper 2 for their thematic study, this one, much like the content, is focused on kind of these bigger themes. This is really focusing on kind of a conceptual understanding of this. The students, as I mentioned, are going to bring with them, not physically, they have to, have these in their minds at their
Hmm.
disposal. They're going to have these kind of case studies that they're going to use to answer these questions, and they will have to first kind of explain a general historical concept. And so they'll draw from their examples to look at causes and consequences. And then from there, they're going to zoom in a little bit more on their themes. They're going to have a question directly related to the theme of conflict or whatever. And they're going to have to demonstrate that they have knowledge both of their example and how their example helps them understand the themes. So
Right.
they're going to, be synthesizing those examples together to answer, a question on conflict or something.
And then just real briefly, let's just talk about how the HL, what their paper three's got. I think you said some things about it already.
Yeah, the paper 3, again, it's based on the regional study, and so it's based on region and those various topics. I will say the paper 3 is probably the most typical history essay kind of a paper that you would expect. You're given a prompt, you've got to write yourself a multi-paragraph essay here, and you have to do one from each of the topics that you've covered. They are all going to be based on these what we call to what extent questions. So it's really not just about tell us what you know. It's not a narrative thing. It's about here's an argument. Evaluate this argument. What are some different ways of looking at this argument? We got to see that critical evaluation of the argument in there. And that's, I think, a really important thing, again, that kids take away is that there's not just a right answer. There's
Mhm.
different ways of looking at these things and different arguments. Some are stronger than others. And
Yeah.
that's a crucial thing to learn.
Well, I think one of the things I really enjoy about IB in general, but history specifically, is that I think lay people should be said, people that are not in the education directly, and especially not in IB education, think of history as days and dates, and you're only
Mhm.
smart if you can remember, the date of something. And in fact, this, anyone who's listened this far has figured out that this is way more sophisticated than that, and we can count on these students to go find those dates and times if they need them. But understanding the context and the actual way in which history is understood and written about and used sometimes is all much more important. And we'd be very happy to have students have this background as they leave and go out and make new history.
It's absolutely true. But information is pretty cheap now, right? Like if we
Right.
don't remember the date, I mean, we can find it in a matter of seconds. In fact, we did that, right? It's really more about how are we organizing our thoughts? How are we organizing our arguments? What different ways can we look at these things? And so, like, if a student comes in to get help with that, that's what I tend to focus on more. That is, I would say, more important across the board.
You want to address what you love about teaching the course and any final comments holistically.
I think what I love about this course is really what I love about history. My background is in history. I studied history, and I didn't study history so I could do really good at trivia night. Like I didn't study history just so I knew everything. History is not just about telling story. I mean, some people do. Some people argue that's the point, is that you learn like your national narrative, and it's all. To me, history is about thinking critically. It's about searching for the truth, trying to understand how we know that this is truth. And I think we were surrounded with AI that is often wrong. We are surrounded with social media that has misinformation and disinformation. There's conscious efforts to manipulate the information that's coming. History is not just about learning about, when did World War II start? It's not about that. It's about looking for lessons from the past that we can apply to the experiences we have now, and it's looking at the statements that are being made, claims that are being made, and determine, how confident are we that those statements are true? And I think history is the perfect vehicle to do that. And I think it's valuable for anybody, regardless of what direction they're going in.
Well, good. Well, thanks so much, Jim, for taking the time to give us an overview of this course. And I look forward to speaking to you again.
Anytime, John. I really enjoyed it.